Chapter 201. Zhang uses Superman to show his strength to other countries. Taros knew this plan was the best option for now. He hesitated and then stopped himself. Won't this cost you too much? No, Carol said with a heroic smile. This won't be hard for me. She clenched her fist. After all these years, have you forgotten what I look like in a fight? Of course not. That's impossible to forget, Taros replied, smiling. Carol glanced around. Where's Fury? He's not with you. Is he on the SW Ord station? Or with S.H.I.E.L.D.? Actually, Taros hesitated. Fury has been detained by the United Nations. Detained? What happened? Carol frowned. United Nations headquarters. The Security Council chamber was full. Representatives from around the world had gathered. Today's agenda was the interrogation of Nick Fury, an extraordinary item for the Security Council, but both S.H.I.E.L.D. and SW were international organizations under its oversight, and Fury had been at the helm of both while global-level incidents occurred. The Council had decided to handle the questioning itself. Fury sat alone in a solid wooden armchair in the center of the room. The representatives sat in a ring about 5 meters away. Maria Hill, now listed as Deputy Director of the Avengers, handed thick briefing packets to each delegate. Hill and Fury had long been close. She'd been one of his trusted confidants, and her career moves had always been coordinated with the Security Council. Distinguished representatives, it is an honor to. Hill began, poised in a suit and skirt, methodically laying out Fury's record and the allegations against him. When she mentioned that half of SW-Ord's ranks had been infiltrated by Skrulls, the alloy door to the chamber suddenly burst open with a clang. A woman in a red and blue battlesuit strode in. Security guards rushed to stop her. "You can't enter. Important meeting in progress," they shouted. 2 guards with short batons tried to block her, but she barely paused, pushing them aside with a single, effortless gesture. They slammed into the wall and collapsed, groaning and unconscious. "Sorry, I'm a bit pressed for time," she said, entering with a clap. "I have some business with Fury. The meeting will have to wait." "Who are you?" someone demanded. "Don't move. Security." Others cried. Amid the chaos, she crossed to Fury. "Motherfucker. Carol? Back so soon?" Fury's face lit up with surprise and relief. "Looks like you already met Taros." "That's right." Carol glanced at the delegates as they tried to stand, then reached down, scooped Fury up, and said, "Let's talk somewhere else." "Oh, so you have your own plans?" Fury laughed. They shot up and out of the chamber, leaving more security to scramble after them. Before anyone could stop them, they were gone. They landed in a rundown apartment in a Brooklyn slum. "This is one of my hideouts," Carol said. "Haven't been here in a while, so it's messy. Make yourself comfortable." The place was tiny, a creaky bed, 2 chairs, and a round wooden table in a cramped dozen square meters. Fury dropped into a chair that protested with every weight shift. "You can live like this now?" Carol said, wiping the seat and sitting. "It's good enough. And since I interrupted your interrogation, this hideout might not stay hidden much longer." Fury put his hands on his knees. "Welcome back, Carol. It's been over 10 years. "It has. When I left, I figured you'd hit the pager right away." Carol studied him. He looked drained. "You should have let me come back sooner. You look like hell." "Really? For some trifling matters, you come all this way?" Fury grinned. "You're my nuclear button. I can do more than be a nuclear bomb." Carol smiled. After a beat, Fury said, "Taros should have told you why I wanted you back." Carol nodded. "S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, Superman. He told me everything." "And the millions of Skrulls?" Fury asked. "He told me about them too." "You're planning to help them?" "I can't leave them wandering the galaxy like that, Fury." "What are you going to do?" Fury leaned forward. "Superman's the strongest on Earth right now, and every nation is terrified of him." He lowered his voice. "You're thinking of making a play against him?" Carol shook her head. "Not a play. I want to use him to show other countries what I'm capable of." "And he's cost you before," Fury pressed. "You want revenge?" "As a friend, I'm more than willing to help you get a little payback." Carol balled her fist and grinned. Fury studied her, then sighed. "I hoped you'd simply make Superman careful around you, a way to assert some balance," he said. "But I never imagined you'd act because of the Skrulls." "There's a big difference," Fury emphasized. "Have you really thought this through? Letting millions of Skrulls stay on Earth is enormous." "I've thought it through," Carol said solemnly. And don't worry, after this, Superman will still be Earth's most reliable protector. I'll be careful. I won't make him suffer. I have a plan for the Skrulls, Fury said quietly. Their situation will be resolved soon. He paused, then added, I've always trusted Taros, because of our past and because of you. Learning he brought millions of Skrulls here shook that trust. My instincts tell me I can't let them roam uncontained, Carol replied. Fury nodded. I hope your decision is the right one. Now, take me back to the United Nations, Fury said. You're going back to be interrogated? Carol frowned. If I don't go back, I'll be a fugitive, Fury said, flashing a crooked grin that made his eye patch look almost comical. Besides, I can help you handle the fallout from abducting a major official. You don't want to be on any wanted posters, do you? Carol considered, then nodded. All right, I'll let them know who I am before I leave you. I'll be looking forward to that. Fury trusted Captain Marvel's strength without question. Carol flew him back to the United Nations. Once Fury was in custody again, Carol used the intelligence he'd shared to head to a high-end apartment building in Brooklyn. Photon energy coalesced around her, and her eyes sharpened. Chapter 2 and 2. I just made a slight move. October in New York was dry and rainless. The sky was as clear as ever. As usual, Leon sat on the open-air balcony, cultivating. Using the space stone as his medium, he immersed himself in the ocean of cosmic law. Every cell in his body seemed to sing in the sunlight. Suddenly, as if sensing something, he stopped and opened his eyes. A beam of light flew in from Manhattan and hovered outside the balcony railing, resolving into a figure. Golden hair floated around her like a jellyfish in water, and a square-jawed face looked startlingly familiar. Carol, Captain Marvel, jokingly called Auntie Captain Marvel. Leon recognized her at once. He wasn't surprised. Now that the Skrull had been driven off Earth, it was only natural she'd show up. In his experience, Carol represented a certain type of international do-gooder. They hadn't even fixed their own house, yet they poked into everyone else's affairs, often with mixed results. Her reputation among other civilizations was likewise conflicted. She had helped many, but the negative consequences of her interventions were notorious. Take the Kree Empire. After she destroyed the supreme intelligence that governed Hala under the banner of liberation, the Kree spiraled into civil war. A once proud empire had been brought low, its people suffered, and even their sun had gone out. The Kree now called Carol the Annihilator. These associations came to Leon as soon as he saw her, not because he overanalyzed, but because Carol simply hovered there, silently studying him. That made his mind wander. After a few seconds, he spoke first. You hear about the Skrull? Ah, yes, that's right. Carol startled. She had been staring blankly. She cursed inwardly. Her plan before arriving had been simple: provoke Superman a little, lead him to a place with cameras, fight him, then convert an enemy into an ally. She hadn't expected to be caught staring. The Superman in front of her matched Fury's photo at first glance. But up close, he was different. An extremely handsome Asian man, bare-chested on the balcony, sun highlighting sculpted muscles. A faint, golden haze of energy flowed over him, making him look like a sunny neighbor and, at the same time, like a mythic god, an incarnation of Heracles or Apollo. Carol had seen handsome rulers and kings who had asked her to be their queen, but she had never seen anyone quite like this. A familiar energy surrounded him, and she felt an inexplicable closeness. She stood there, momentarily stunned, until Leon's next line snapped her back. You've come to the wrong person. If you want the Skrull to stay, you don't need to tell me. Everyone on Earth is expelling them. Go tell everyone else. Leon had no idea his looks combined with the Space Stone's energy had captivated the woman before him. He was thinking instead about whether he could provoke her into a fight. He'd missed challenging opponents since the Dormammu battle, and a new sparring partner would be welcome. Is that so? Carol narrowed her eyes. Leon's cool indifference calmed and angered her in equal measure. She dealt with powerful beings across the galaxy. Arrogance like this could be knocked down and put to rights. She smiled, flexed her wrist. Compared to explaining things to everyone, I think defeating you in public is more convincing. So you want to challenge me? Fight for the Skrull? Leon's eyes flickered. Not a challenge. Beat you. Since fully awakening her powers, Carol spoke with blunt force. Her aura sharpened. And it's not for the Skrull. It's for justice. Justice? Your justice? Leon smiled faintly. He rose and the Dormammu suit slid across his skin, the dark uniform swallowing him. Jarvis, you heard her. Let the whole world see how this anti fights for justice. Yes, young Master Leon. All available satellites are being mobilized. Jarvis's calm voice answered. Carol's face soured. Wait, what did you call me? Auntie, isn't it? Leon said, looking at her with a slightly amused expression. Then he shot upward and disappeared into the clouds. Auntie, fine. Arrogant boy, I'll show you what a powerful being in the universe can do. Embarrassed and annoyed, Carol flared her photon energy. Her hair floated with the power, each strand singing as it charged. She gave chase. They ascended until they reached the stratosphere, roughly 30 kilometers above the ground. Below, clouds lay arranged like cut blocks of tofu, reflecting the harsh sunlight, like the clashing auras of the two combatants. Leon's hands hung at his sides. You should use your stronger combat mode. Don't hold back. Right now, you're too weak. You actually know about double star mode? Carol scoffed. Sorry, I don't need it to deal with you. She had rarely met anyone as arrogant as this in recent years. Taros had told her Superman could withstand nuclear blasts, but strong defense didn't necessarily mean offense. Many species were durable, but weak in attack. Carol hadn't expected to be beaten on a backwater planet like Earth, and she wouldn't be. Photon energy spooled around her as she surged straight at Leon. Her iron fist tore through the air, a sharp crack as she broke the sound barrier, and she struck for his face. The punch was meant to end the fight quickly. Leon sighed. He had no interest in trading blows with that kind of punch. His eyes glowed red, and two heat vision beams cut through the high-altitude air, slicing directly toward Carol. Caught off guard, she took the full brunt. The searing rays punched through her chest before she could react. Her life force plunged. Her body's emergency systems kicked in, and reflexively, she burst into double star mode. Even so, the heat vision's force sent her screaming and skidding back. Pain tore from her throat as the beams repelled her unstoppable figure. She was thrown kilometers away. Ah! Her scream echoed across the clouds. After being hurled back, she slammed on photon thrust and pushed the heat vision back, trying to regain control. Chapter 2 of 3. Chapter is your limit. For a moment, Leon only increased his strength a little. Carol's fully charged photon energy collapsed like fog. The heat vision drove her straight down from high altitude, like a migratory bird struck by a falling meteor. Leon stopped the beam and stared at the hole blasted through the cloud layer, brows tightening. Was that double star mode just now? He wasn't sure. His heat vision had been used casually, nowhere near 1/10,000th of its power, yet Carol had looked powerless to respond. Probably not. Leon told himself she'd been careless and deserved another chance. A few seconds later, Carol burst out of the clouds again, golden light leaking from her like a flare. Her hair stood up like flame, white gold energy roiled around her as if forming a river. Her eyes shone with dense golden light. She looked like a war angel wrapped in holy radiance. This was unquestionably double star mode. In this state, her power rose dramatically, speed that could break light speed and strength that seemed boundless. But Leon could see past the photon manifestation. Through the energy, he watched Captain Marvel's chest be a bloody ruin, her square jaw streaked with blood. She was seriously injured, though her potent healing factor was already knitting wounds closed. How can you be so strong? Carol's voice trembled between shock and fury. Leon cocked his head. Are you in double star mode now? Carol took the question as an insult. Her face exploded with emotion, and she threw a punch. You bastard! Get lost! In Leon's mind, a true double star mode, Carol should be at least a Sky Father tier. Certainly not something that couldn't repel a heat vision. But the question only made her angrier. She accelerated and closed the several hundred meters between them in the blink of an eye. A mountain-shattering, sea-splitting force surged from her fist, moving at 100,000 meters per second. The high-altitude air pressure changed with every swing. Wind howled, and a vacuum seemed to trail her hand. To Leon, the motion still looked sluggish. He tilted his head and stepped aside. Carol's fist grazed his cheek. She followed up immediately, and he adjusted his position once more, dodging with effortless calm. In seconds, she unleashed 30 blows. Leon dodged them all, like a practiced matador, each evasion deepening the disappointment in his eyes. He missed Dormammu's thick skin. Finally, he sidestepped another blow and pushed Carol away with a palm, sending her several hundred meters. Enough. I understand your strength. You're not the opponent I'm looking for. He shook his head. Your double star mode has a very high ceiling, but you can't even tap 1/10,000th of it. Now take your scrolls and leave Earth. Don't force me to act for real. In official power terms, Carol was rated a 5, while Hulk was a full 7. Level 5 strength corresponded to roughly 25 to 75 tons. By herself, she wasn't enormously strong. Her power came from photon energy. It bolstered her defense, amplified her strength, and most dramatically, boosted her speed. At full output, her speed could reach or even exceed light speed, and at those velocities, even a 100-ton blow could level a continental shelf. That's why the what-if variant had planet-busting capability. She had freely used enormous amounts of energy at extreme speeds. This Carol, however, hadn't developed double star mode enough. Leon had never seen her generate attacks measured in millions of tons or strikes at thousands of Mach. At best, she resembled the version of himself before he crossed into the starry sky world. He thought back to his first return to Earth from the Universe ship. He really could have gone toe-to-toe with Captain Marvel then. Now, resigned, he was ready to go home and keep cultivating. A beam of light cut across the sky and blocked his path. Someone who only dares to dodge has no right to say, I can't reach double star mode's limits. Carol roared, frustration boiling over from all those missed punches. Leon slowly turned, expressionless, and held out a hand. Come. That careless invitation only fueled her. Carol's face twisted, and she tore through the sound barrier, the airflow she created splitting the clouds beneath her. Leon took it in silently. Using flight to add velocity to a punch made it faster. She couldn't teleport to light speed, but she could steadily accelerate in flight. That made her excellent as a human missile. No wonder the movies always showed her ramming ships headfirst. He raised his hand to meet the blow. Her fist, burning with photon energy, slammed into his palm and simply stopped. Leon caught it and held it as if it were an object no heavier than a pebble. How is this possible? Carol tried to yank her hand back, to shove him off, but it was like wrestling a mountain. Even when she poured energy into the struggle, she couldn't budge him. Let go, she screamed, swinging her other fist. Leon glanced at her and grabbed the swinging arm. With a slight push of space stone energy through his palm, he broke through Carol's photon field. A titanic force, equivalent to half Earth's weight, focused onto a few square centimeters of her arm. The bone shattered. Her forearm twisted 90 degrees at the midsection. White bone cut through tissue and blood sprayed across the high sky. Ah! Her scream echoed through the thin air, the color draining from her face. Adrenaline flooded her, and pain went from acute to background, but her body's instinct to escape took over. She lashed out, trying to break free, but Leon relaxed his grip and stepped back, then delivered a short, precise punch to her chest. Bones cracked, organs ruptured, the sound crisp even through the rarefied atmosphere. Carol's eyes bulged. She gasped and sobbed. In a heartbeat, the light left her eyes. Her energy collapsed, and she slumped against Leon's arm. These wounds wouldn't kill Captain Marvel, but they would put her out of action for days. Leon shook his head. Her photon defense was strong enough to survive impacts at near light speed, but it was all energy. Strip that away, and she was fragile. Even without the space stone, he could have treated her like a punching bag. Potent defense, negligible endurance when depleted. Compared to fighting Dormammu last time, who could still fight back even after being punched thousands of kilometers away, this ongoing mismatch between Carol's strength and her endurance felt almost tedious. Leon lifted one of her arms, flew up into space, and prepared to toss her toward the Skrull fleet. If she wanted to protect aliens, then she could stay far from Earth with them. This plot section has a second phase. Chapter 204, The Covetousness of the Skrulls. Jarvis beamed the fight between Leon and Captain Marvel live across the globe. Through home televisions, streaming portals, and giant outdoor screens, everyone who still fretted about the Skrull problem watched the clash. A father cooking dinner put down his cleaver. A sleepy student on the subway jolted awake, and hurried pedestrians stopped in their tracks. It's Superman! ordinary people exclaimed. Nick Fury, however, was focused on the strength on display. "This is impossible," he muttered, even while being interrogated. He stood up and swore under his breath. High-ranking officials in capitals around the world were more worried about the woman who could actually fight Superman. "Who is that woman? I want everything on her in 3 minutes." General Ross barked, still radiating authority as he watched the satellite feed. On screen, the fight didn't look like two superhumans tearing up the sky. Because of their speed, the combat resembled two fighter jets weaving through clouds, fleeting, dazzling, hard to parse. All most viewers saw was a woman wreathed in golden light throwing punches too fast for the cameras, then being caught by the wrist by Leon and sent sprawling by a single blow. To casual eyes, she looked flashy but weak. Jarvis, helpful as ever, overlaid speed data and an explanation of why the fight was happening, preventing viewers from assuming Leon was bullying someone helpless. That only sparked more astonishment. The strike speeds registered above Mach 700, each punch. Are those numbers real? Who is this woman trying to protect the Skrulls? Our space agency's simulations match Jarvis's numbers. She's even stronger than when Superman smashed that ground in suburban Sokovia. Holy, thank goodness Superman won, but how strong is he really? He's got so many versions in the comics. We can't resist a Superman-level dictatorship. Shut up, heretic. How dare you insult the Trinity, Superman? I've already locked your IP. I'll roast you. On Earth, the chatter was loud. Inside every ship of the Skrull fleet, the atmosphere was the opposite. A hush so complete it felt physical. The Skrulls watched their destiny arc across Jarvis's feed. At first, neither Taros nor most of the others felt much pressure. Captain Marvel was famous throughout the cosmos, the annihilator who'd nearly toppled the Kree. Surely she could handle a native Earth hero. But reality had other plans. When Carol's fist was trapped in Leon's grip, a young Skrull girl had been shouting, "Go, big sister Carol, smash his head in!" Now the child was frozen, eyes wide with the same confusion the whole fleet felt. Taros, general of their forces, was dumbstruck. The moment Carol was felled by a single blow, his last hope shattered. It felt like stepping off a cliff. His stomach dropped, and the world went lightheaded. How could Carol lose? But she had. On screen, Leon dragged the incapacitated Carol out of Earth's atmosphere. Taros forced himself to a calm face and led a group of senior officers to the hatch. A few seconds later, Leon appeared at the opening. Taros tried to greet him, but Leon merely tossed Carol onto the floor like a sack of grain, said one word, "Scram," and vanished through the hatch. The smile left Taros's face instantly. He lowered his head, the color drained from him, and after a frozen beat, he crouched beside Carol to check her. She was soaked in cold sweat. Her left forearm was broken. Where bone should have been, there was ragged tissue. Blood and shattered bone would normally have been obvious, but Carol's healing was doing impressive work. Her comminuted fractures had stopped bleeding and were already knitting thanks to her photon-augmented physiology. Still, her face was ashen, and she trembled. Leon's final blow had pulverized most of her internal organs, except, miraculously, her heart. If not for her photon energy, she would have died on impact. "Carol, how do you feel?" Taros barked. "Someone get her to the med ward, now." Carol waved him off weakly. "No, I can move on my own." "But your injuries," Taros started, helpless. Large drops of sweat rolled down her face. She clenched her teeth and shook her head stubbornly, and Taros, worried and frustrated, could do nothing against her will. Among the gathered Skrulls, others saw the scene differently. Behind Taros, Gravik and a few younger warriors exchanged looks full of hungry calculations. They watched Carol's blood-smeared form and the dark scabs that clung to her armor. Greed flickered behind their eyes. Carol forced herself to summon photon energy. The agony had nearly robbed her of consciousness, but the pain subsided enough for her to focus. Under that golden light, her shattered bones reset and internal tissue began to regenerate. She pushed herself up, braced her hands against the hull, and said, voice steadier than her body, "Take me back to the ship, Taros." "Get her into the escape pod. Sauron, help her," Taros ordered. Sauron moved quickly, supporting Carol as she limped toward the ship's interior. Taros watched them go, expression a complicated mix of relief and despair. Their chance to settle on Earth had vanished. Their hope for a new home now depended on Captain Marvel's survival and cooperation. General. A whisper at his shoulder made Taros turn. Gravik stood there, flanked by others, young, zealous, and dangerous. They looked like opportunists sizing up a prize. "What is it?" Taros asked. Eyes narrowed. He knew these were the warmongers among them. "Carol is already beaten by Superman. Put away whatever dangerous notions you're entertaining." "No, General," Gravik said softly, his gaze following the pod where Carol had been taken. There was something wolfish in his smile. "Now is the best time. Captain Marvel is at her weakest. If we get her blood, everything changes." Chapter 205, Super Scroll, Carol's blood? What use is her blood? Taros was first stunned, then horrified. "Are you saying you want to create Super Scrolls?" "Exactly, General. This is our last chance." Gravik's expression had gone cold. "Captain Marvel and Nick Fury promised to find us a new home, but more than 10 years have passed and they haven't delivered. Then we'll use their power to take back what is ours." "General, Carol was badly hurt. If we capture her, we can take a sample of her blood and use it to gain her abilities." Taros stared blankly at the unhinged young Skrull standing before him, then glanced at the others with a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Dangerous thoughts surfaced, thoughts he had no right to entertain, but he tamped them down at once. "The method for creating Super Skrulls was lost during our escape," he said, shaking his head. "Abandon this fantasy, Gravik." Gravik laughed. "You're wrong, General. The technology wasn't lost. The scientists who developed it came to Earth with us. They're still alive down there. We only need your command, and we can become powerful again, right away." Taros's heart lurched. For a moment he almost yielded, but he forced himself to refuse. "No, we can't do this. She's our ally, Gravik. Besides, even injured, no one can defeat her. And what good would making Super Skrulls even do? That's Superman." Taros let out a weary sigh, waving his hand. "Now disperse. Go back and get some rest. After Carol recovers, we'll leave the solar system." Before he left, he checked Carol's cabin personally to make sure she had left no blood behind. The young Skrulls hesitated, furious and eager to act against Captain Marvel. She might be vulnerable now, but her reputation still held sway. Without Taros's command, none dared to move. They left, dejected. Only Gravik lingered, eyes bloodshot, staring after Taros's retreating figure, plotting. The next day on Earth, the Avengers, acting for the Security Council, announced that all Skrulls hidden on Earth had been located and processed. In hidden corners around the globe, hundreds of thousands of people who had been replaced by Skrulls finally saw the light of day. Although the Skrulls had infiltrated extensively, thanks to Captain Marvel and Nick Fury, most of them had been living in abandoned nuclear facilities, places like Chernobyl. Aside from those whom Nick Fury had ordered to be removed permanently, there had been surprisingly little slaughter. The replaced humans were almost all alive in life support. When they were found, they were physically weak but otherwise unharmed, like people waking from a long sleep. Overpowered was disbanded and its staff sent back to Earth for civilian oversight. Nick Fury and Carol's close friend, Maria Rambeau, were both sentenced to life imprisonment. The Security Council gave Fury a choice: spend the rest of his days on the raft or leave Earth forever with his Skrull comrades. Fury chose to stay. He felt Earth would always need him. Carol, recovered from her injuries, returned to Earth as well. This time, she did not come with weapons. She went to the United Nations to plead for the Skrulls to be allowed to stay. She received only cold shoulders. Within hours, officials had dug up every detail of her past. To many, a human who had once acted against her own species to protect Skrulls looked like a traitor. No one offered mercy. When she left the UN building, even children on the street pointed and spat. "Look at that monster, the human who sided with aliens." The words stabbed at her. Carol had no defense. She left Earth in despair, and from the void of space, she watched the planet she had once called home feel suddenly alien. Regret gnawed at her as she flew back toward her ship. She had no idea a different storm, one born of her own departure, was already gathering. One day earlier, in a cramped room on a Skrull vessel, Gravik had not been idle. "Taros is old," he told a circle of young Skrulls. "He can't lead us any longer. We must find our own way." "How?" someone asked. "It's simple. We need Captain Marvel's blood. She was badly injured. There must be remnants aboard her ship." Taros keeps groveling before her. If she goes to Earth, that will be our chance. A wild light gleamed in Gravik's eyes. While Carol argued with delegates at the United Nations, a small team of Skrulls approached her ship in tiny capsules. Using Skrull techniques, they bypassed the vessel's intelligent systems and slipped inside in single file. The cabin was a mess, Carol's clothes and gear scattered everywhere. The green-skinned youths searched methodically. When one of them picked up a blood-stained towel, confirmed the DNA with a handheld scanner, and gasped, the others erupted in quiet cheers. They carefully sealed the towel, restored the ship to its original state, and left as silently as they'd come. When Captain Marvel returned, she noticed nothing out of place. A few days later, Nick Fury and Maria Rambeau were escorted to the Raft, the underwater penitentiary reserved for the world's most dangerous offenders. Except for impossible surprises, they would spend the rest of their lives locked there. The Avengers also issued an ultimatum to the Skrull fleet: leave the solar system or face the deployment of Superman. With no better option, Carol led the Skrulls through a jump point and away from Earth. 5 days later, the Skrull fleet sailed through the endless dark. Inside one ship, a knot of young Skrulls watched Gravik mount a circular platform with a tense, hopeful silence. The platform was the Super Skrull Generator, a massive disk base with 8 curved pillars rising like the legs of an upturned spider, enclosing the chamber. The device only needed a blood sample. With it, the machinery could engineer enhanced Skrulls capable of manifesting a target's superhuman abilities, though at first only at 60 to 70% of the original's power. The apparatus could produce many such Super Skrulls until their supply of biomaterial ran out. More terrifyingly, each Super Skrull could combine abilities. With enough Skrulls carrying Captain Marvel's powers, they could then stack Superman's abilities on top. As Gravik prepared the machine and the crew watched, he pictured it all: the day when the Skrulls would rise again and reclaim their place as overlords of the universe. The device to make Super Skrulls was built a long time ago, Gravik declared as the crew crowded around the console. It was the incompetence of Taros that made us lose hope and stopped us from using it. Now, our so-called general has been frightened by the Earthlings. From this moment on, we will chart our own course, rely on our own strength, and make the Skrull great again. Begin. The operator at the control panel drew a deep breath and hit the start. Everyone held their breath. 8 long pillars on the circular platform flared with electric arcs, linking into a single sheet that buzzed like a swarm of wings, growing from faint to blinding. The whole machine erupted in a powerful light, like a world gate swinging open. The Skrulls shut their eyes until the glare dimmed. When they looked again, Gravik had casually ripped off his shirt. Under a dozen expectant gazes, a vast surge of white-gold photon energy burst from his body. Double star mode. The assembled Skrulls gasped. Seconds later, the ship exploded with cheers. Brothers and sisters, the time to strike back is now. Earth belongs to the Skrull. Gravik floated above the deck and shouted. The cheering became a chant. Overthrow human tyranny. Earth belongs to the Skrull. By the 6th day, fleets of Skrulls converged on Gravik's ship. The sudden swell of supporters drew Taros' attention. He forced his way aboard with the high command. Gravik, what are you doing? Are you still bent on that madness? Taros pushed through the crowd and found him. Taros' gaze snagged on the huge machine. By the stars? You actually replicated it? He stared at the Super Skrull modification equipment in disbelief. I told you we had a chance. You regret it now? Regret not taking the chance to get Carol's blood 2 days ago? Gravik sneered, a cold smile cutting his face. He looked at Taros like a predator. The older Skrull's shock slowly cooled into dread as he took in the faces of the young Skrulls around Gravik. Dozens of youth stared back with icy contempt, no respect for the general, only disdain. You've made up your minds, Taros said, frowning. You're abandoning my command as general and choosing the opposite course? So what? Gravik answered without hesitation. Stop this, Gravik. Whatever you plan, stop. Taros' voice was grave. The universe is not as simple as you think. You're young. Don't be rash. Rash? Ha! Gravik laughed, covering his mouth with one hand. His laughter swelled, wild and triumphant, rolling through the ship like thunder. Do you see? He turned to the gathered Skrulls and baited them. Do you see? This is our general. Weak, hypocritical, indecisive. He only knows compromise and retreat. He stepped up and slapped Taros's chest. You don't understand how great we can be. What about Captain Marvel? What about Superman? They were made to submit. Gravik, Taros narrowed his eyes. Do not drag the scroll into a worse fate. A worse fate? Gravik's eyes went hard and terrifying. What could be worse than what we have now? He thrust his voice like a spear. Brothers and sisters, show the general how great we are. Boom. At his command, dozens of scrolls flared into photon energy, green-skinned versions of Captain Marvel in double star mode. Taros's face went pale. When did you? He breathed. He felt the air tighten in his lungs. Only days ago, you refused me. How is this not enough proof? General, do you still think we are rash? As Gravik watched Taros's horrified eyes sweep the room, he said quietly, You're going back to attack Earth, aren't you? Taros's expression crumpled. Don't do this. Go elsewhere. Find another planet. Rebuild Skrullos somewhere safe. Gravik blinked in mock confusion. Even now you protect Earth? How fond are you of that place? Or are you one of them? He spread his hands to the crowd. You see, there is one person who keeps the scroll from greatness. That person is our general. He turned his head, locked onto Taros. Sorry, General. You are no longer the general. Before Taros could react, bloodied hands punched through his chest. Gravik withdrew calmly and tossed the mortally wounded Taros to the deck. The old general gurgled and gasped on the floor. From now on, I am the general. Gravik's wolfish eyes swept the gathered scrolls. Tomorrow we leave for Earth. Tonight, we take Captain Marvel. That night came 6 hours later. Outside Carol's ship, more than a dozen super scrolls bristling with photon energy ringed the hull. The hatch hissed and opened. Carol stepped into the air, pupils narrowing at the sight of so many mirrors of herself in double star mode. Scrolls, she murmured, then tapped her communicator to reach the scroll channel. Where is Taros? Did he send you? No one answered. The channel was dead. Carol's jaw tightened. Then it seems my old friend is in danger, she said aloud. Photon energy flared around her as she shifted into double star mode. Dozens of green-clad scrolls surged at once. 3 hours later, a blood-soaked Carol was thrown into Gravik's ship. He looked down at her as 2 super scrolls restrained her, draining every flicker of photon energy she could muster. Drain her blood and transform as many super scrolls as possible quickly, Gravik ordered. He stared out a porthole into the dark sea of stars. Next, it's Superman. On the 7th day, a jump point opened at the solar system's outer edge. Hordes of Skrull vessels poured through. Captain Marvel, famous across the galaxy, was lashed to the bow of the flagship, spread eagle like a trophy pinned up by primitives in a hunt. Her face was a pale, hollow thing. Nearly all her blood and energy had been taken, her life clinging to a faint residue of photon light. 2 super scrolls stood beside her, siphoning any recovery she made. Inside the main hold, nearly 1,000 super scrolls gathered. Gravik stood before them, arms crossed, and declared, We are taking Earth. This time our only goal is to obtain Superman's blood. Chapter 207, Wolf, Wolf, Wolf. Judging from the battle between Captain Marvel and Superman, Gravik said, Our chances of defeating Superman and extracting his blood are very slim. Fortunately, we have another path. Nick Fury had us investigate Superman. During that investigation, we found all of Superman's past DNA, his blood, tissue samples, were recovered by Tony Stark from other institutions and are stored in Avengers Tower. If it weren't for that artificial intelligence inexplicably detecting us, we would have taken those samples long ago. So now we reclaim what rightfully belongs to us. The plan is simple. Superman is powerful, so we split into 3 teams. The first team, 500, will spread across the world to destroy human cities and carry out massacres. The second team, 100, will capture Superman's relatives and friends. The third team, 30, will come with me to the Avengers. The rest will guard the fleet and stand ready for our return. Gravik's eyes flashed with malice. Those Superman worshippers always called him a god, a righteous paragon. Today he would nail that god to a cross and show the world what he really was. Because he is Superman, because he's kind and moral, we will use humans to distract him and his loved ones to break him, he vowed. When the world collapses into chaos and his people are threatened, that will be our chance to seize his blood. The first and second teams will face mortal danger at any moment, he warned, but his voice was steady. For the Great Scroll, all sacrifices are worth it. I will lead the most dangerous fronts with you. We will never retreat and never fear death. There will be contingencies. If the plan fails, the remaining forces will take the fleet through the jump point and escape. After escaping, find a weak, life-bearing planet and take Captain Marvel there to hide. With her constantly regenerating blood, one day the scroll will return to Earth. Gravik pounded his chest. Today, we die for the scroll. Everyone struck their chests in unison, voices merging into one cry. Die for the scroll. Over 600 Super Skrull piloted stealth craft and landed on Earth. They arrived quietly, dispersed silently, and were ready to unleash simultaneous devastation across the globe. Tali and Vara touched down in Manhattan. They were two of Gravik's trusted lieutenants. Their target was New York, the city itself, and the Statue of Liberty on Liberty Island. They would begin the destruction the moment they received the signal. Vara, do you think we can win? Tali asked, watching the bustling streets below. She licked her lips as the crowd noise reached them. Whether we can win or not, we have to do it, Vara said. I trust Gravik's plan. He won't be wrong. Tali nodded. Photon energy flickered faintly along her skin. I'm like you. I'll kill these humans without hesitation. After all these years hiding, I'm sick of pretending to be them. Vara gave a bitter laugh. Who isn't? When we rule Earth, I'll make sure these humans get painted green. Outside Midtown High School, Gaia and Somali crouched in a tree. Both belonged to the Dove faction. Gaia was Taros's daughter. Neither of them wanted to invade Earth or kidnap Superman's family, but the situation had come to a head. This was a racial fight for survival. Individual feelings no longer counted. Even as Super Skrull, they were small eddies in their people's great current. Gaia watched through a window as Sherry Birkin answered a teacher's question in class. She let out a soft sigh. I don't want to do this. Then stop thinking about it, Somali whispered. After we finish this mission, we'll take everyone and leave Skrull. With our strength, we can live anywhere in the universe. Why should we kill people? Gaia brightened. I was thinking of taking Mom to Xandar. I heard their welfare's good. They imagined a life after the war. They weren't alone in that wish. Many of the Super Skrull felt the same. War was a distant, bitter word to the Skrull who had been on the run for decades. Now, for the first time, they caught a glimpse of a possible future, and they wanted it with all their hearts. Soon, every Skrull unit was in position. From New York, Hong Kong, and Paris to tiny villages and fishing ports, Super Skrull waited. Gravik stood in the Amazon where his flagship had landed, watching the communication map and confirming each team's readiness. He pressed the comm device to his ear and gave the order. Action begins. Wolf, wolf, wolf. The three wolves were the code that fully confirmed the operation. Gravik understood the history of invasion codes. Once, a nation had used tiger, tiger, tiger to launch an assault, and it had failed. Tigers, he thought, were too savage and too solitary. He saw himself as a wolf, a pack animal that strikes only when victory is likely, that hunts together and rarely fails. Everywhere, 600 Super Skrull received the signal and moved. They burst from foliage and crowds, bodies flaring with photon energy, 600 godlike figures descending from the sky. Raising hands, crackling with power, they hurtled toward the ground like meteors. Within seconds, countries around the world spiraled into crisis. Pedestrians barely registered a blur before them. One moment the street was normal, and the next a figure tore through the air, trailing flame. Under ordinary circumstances, those people would have had no time to react. Impact would have been instant and fatal. But as the Super Skrull reached the peak of their speed, something strange happened. An invisible ripple swept over the Earth. Every Super Skrull froze in midair. Warriors moving at hypersonic speeds came to an abrupt halt, as if time itself had seized them. Their momentum vanished without any warning, their kinetic energy dissipating like a drop of water in the sun. Chapter 208. The noise hurt my ears. Their heads, arms, and thighs were frozen in place, solidified like plaster statues, but the white gold photon energy on their bodies still burned and rose. If one looked closely, they could see hair floating in the light and eyeballs spinning wildly with panic. Vara, Tali, Gaia, Somali. A second before they struck, Every scroll had been daydreaming about life after the war. Less than a second after they moved, despair fell on them. Humph. A cold snort echoed in every Super Scroll's ear. Their eyes swung wildly, searching for the owner of that voice, but all they could see were panicked, screaming humans below. Only seconds later did voices come through their earpieces. "You Skrulls really love running headlong down the path to death," one said. "So Superman? How could you possibly have detected our actions?" Gravik snapped. Back on a Brooklyn apartment balcony, Leon's invisible psychic presence spread outward, reaching every corner of the solar system. He couldn't help but sigh. These idiots were interrupting his quiet sunbathing again. He'd already handed scroll matters off to the Men in Black and Tony Stark. If Captain Marvel hadn't shown up earlier, he wouldn't even have bothered to look. Tony and the Men in Black were reluctant to commit genocide. Leon didn't want to get involved either. If the Skrulls would just keep moving, let them be. But they had to rush headlong toward their own deaths. They'd seen the footage of his fight with Captain Marvel and still dared to act. It was like a domestic pig, worried its master's cleaver would rust from disuse, sacrificing itself to sharpen the blade. He was speechless. Still, since they'd acted, he would see it through. When Leon did something, he liked doing it properly. His figure vanished from the balcony and reappeared in front of Gravik in the Amazon. So the Super Skrulls heard the conversation on their communicators. "How could you possibly have detected our actions?" Gravik was losing his mind. The plan had failed at the very first step. "Detected?" Leon said, one hand on his hip, mildly annoyed. "You act like you were being subtle. I can pick up energy releases the moment you make them and respond within a millisecond to lock you in place like this." No, it wasn't detection," Leon went on. "It was because you kept shouting, 'Superman, Superman,' out on the edge of the solar system. You were annoying the hell out of my ears." After the Source Will had modified Leon's superhearing, it had gained spatiotemporal attributes, enough to hear movements anywhere in the solar system. Normally, he filtered out irrelevant noise with his superbrain. But these Skrulls, as soon as they returned, were screaming, "Superman, Superman," like they were calling a spirit. If they'd been shouting on Earth, that would have been one thing, but they were yelling beyond Neptune. What kind of fandom holds a Comic-Con at the edge of the solar system? Even the lunatics in his Superman cult wouldn't do that. Leon couldn't help but make a theatrical slap in Gravik's direction. "If there's a next time, don't call me Superman. Call me you-know-who. At least then I might not notice." Gravik stared blankly, too stunned to speak. Its hawk-like, wolfish eyes seemed covered with a gray cloth. "No, impossible. This is impossible. In Tony Stark's movie, you fell because of high-altitude icing," it muttered, clutching desperately at fake evidence. The poor alien believed film logic more than anything. Leon didn't bother to argue. He looked up toward the stars and said conversationally, "You know, I actually like close-quarters fighting. Not long ago, I fought a huge black bear from the dark dimension. It was a back-and-forth, thrilling scrap. A few days ago, a glowing fly came to bother me. She wasn't strong, but she was insistent, so I swatted her away. And now a bunch of maggots from a toilet crawled out trying to make me sick. That's intolerable. What do you do with maggots, Skrull? Honestly, I don't even want to lift a fist." Leon waved his hand. "Let's just burn them all away." Sometimes Leon felt a kinship with Dyda, the human host of Ultraman. They both reached for brute force, the red form, rather than more efficient psychic techniques or energy beams. It was less efficient, but it was satisfying. Today, though, he genuinely had no intention of switching forms for hand-to-hand combat. He tightened his psychic grip, building pressure and constriction, preparing to crush the Super Skrulls. As the invisible pressure around Gravik intensified, terror exploded through the alien's chest. It trembled from body to soul, death approaching like a storm. Not only Gravik, every Skrull across the planet quivered. Some young Super Skrulls who had been shouting that Earth belonged to them and that they'd bring their mothers over after the war were now reduced to tears and snot. No! Gravik tried to release photon energy, clawing for any escape. But as Leon ratcheted up the psychic pressure, Gravik's voice failed. It couldn't even form the word no. Despair wrapped it tight. It knew it could not get away from this being. This was a demon, a butcher, someone who would never let them go. If Gravik died, that might be the end of it for him. But if everyone else died too, the scroll race would be finished. A crackle cut through Gravik's comms as another channel linked in. "Brother Gravik, why isn't anyone answering? Are you all right?" came a sweet, delicate voice, innocent, clear. "Is the plan going smoothly? Oh, why are you all so quiet? Are you already on the ship getting ready to return?" Gravik's eyes widened in panic. On the other end of the line were the children from the fleet, their little cheer squad, supposed to welcome them home in triumph. Chapter 11. Secret Method of Enslavement. They would offer delicious food and blessings to the returning warriors, a sign that true happiness was near. But the girl's voice only made Gravik more ashamed of his recklessness and arrogance. If he hadn't been stubborn, if he hadn't thought he could risk everything on a little power, how could the Skrulls face the danger now? Gravik suddenly understood Taros's warning, and he knew what he had to do. "Run," he croaked, forcing the word out. The vast photon energy coursing through his body withdrew, collapsing back inward. Lion raised an eyebrow as Gravik's form swelled, uneven bulges rippling under his skin. Self-destruct? Lion silently ratcheted up his telekinesis. The energy compressed inside Gravik detonated. His body ballooned and then was crushed by the telekinetic barrier Lion had erected. Fire and black smoke erupted in a confined collapse that felt like a miniature sun imploding. In that final instant, riding the shockwave, Gravik managed to shout into his communicator to the Skrulls still connected to him, "Run, you fools, run!" His voice was a desperate rasp lost in the roar and dust. Lion smoothed the debris with telekinetic ease, then shook his head. "Run! What's the point now?" he muttered, but the self-destruction had been useful. It reminded him that, aside from killing, Gravik could be exploited in other ways. Lion's mind stirred. The mental field that blanketed the planet flooded into the heads of the 629 Super Skrulls nearby. He cast the enslavement secret art. His psychic power formed an invisible net that crept into their souls, tainting and imprinting them. Within seconds, the eyes of all 629 turned Lion's color. Their frantic struggles stilled, their faces calmed. Those who had wanted to seize Earth and those who had sought refuge on another world alike fell to their knees, then prostrated themselves, crying, "Master." The enslavement secret art from the Starry Sky world didn't wipe out a person's logic. Instead, it made everything pivot around Lion. Their first subconscious consideration in any situation became his interests. Thoughts harmful to Lion simply stopped appearing. From that moment on, Lion was everything to them. The cost for the enslaver was severe. The technique damaged the victim's talent, drastically reducing their future potential and perhaps stopping their development altogether. But talent meant little to the Skrulls. They preyed on the genes of other races, so this downside didn't trouble Leon. Satisfied with his first use of the art, Lion issued a mental command. "Come with me. Leave Earth." A chorus of responses, and more than 600 golden glowing Skrulls swept out of the planet. Lion caught up to the Skrull fleet fleeing the solar system and sent his mind through every vessel, enslaving every Super Skrull aboard and ordering them off their ships. As those on the ships disembarked, Carol, strapped to the bow of a main ship, finally had a moment to breathe. With the drain cut off, photon energy flowed back into her, quickly rebuilding the blood her body had lost. Outside the fleet, nearly 1,000 Super Skrulls lined up behind Lion, each pulsing with raw photon power, each a walking bomb capable of laying waste to a planet. Lion stared at them, baffled. Gravik had Captain Marvel captive. It could have made more Super Skrulls, grown stronger, and challenged the galaxy. Even the force standing before him would have been enough to attack Thanos. Why had Gravik still fixated on Earth? Lion concluded that Gravik had been blinded by its rapid ascent. Its hunger had shifted from finding a home to leaping ever higher. Having Captain Marvel, it had rushed to Earth to seize Lion's blood. "What a warped race," Lion said. "Wait here." He flew to the fleet, capes snapping though there was no wind, and planted himself before the massive ships. 2 heat beams lanced from his eyes, sweeping hundreds of kilometers like a colossal blade, cleaving every vessel in their path. Explosions blossomed across the fleet, dense, brilliant, relentless. The enslaved Super Skrulls watched in silence. They were sorrowful as they watched their kin burn. their chests ached. Yet they harbored no anger toward Lion. To them, the slaughter was deserved. Those ships' occupants had dared to strike at their master. In their eyes, they had earned death. Had Lion not looked so calm, some might even have stepped forward to help. As the conflagration spread, a new figure streaked out. Carol, bathed in white gold photon energy. Her reserves replenished, she had regenerated blood and strength. She vaulted from the blazing debris and shot straight for Lion, accelerating toward lightspeed. Her fist met the void with the force of intent. Stop! Her lips begged as she sped in. Lion was amused. This woman had been tied to a ship and drained dry, yet she pleaded for the scrolls. Without hesitation, he answered with a punch. Unlike Carol, who had to build speed across empty space, Lion's blow went from stillness to light speed in an instant. The impact slammed into Carol like a mountain. Her arm buckled, and her whole body skidded backward like a meteor, but she recovered and came again, closing faster. There are innocent scrolls, she forced out between breaths. Lion tapped into her, then sent another strike that launched her further away. Even at her limit, Carol's photon-based defenses were formidable. He had to unleash power, near planet-busting, to shove her off, and she still recovered. They traded a few more blows until Lion grew bored. When she lunged at him at light speed again, he caught the strike with his left hand and, with his right, seized her by the throat. Every time Carol fought Leon, she felt stripped back to being an ordinary person. She had no way to resist him. Just now, before she could steady herself, his hand clamped around her throat. A brutal pressure squeezed the air from her lungs. Blood fled her head, her face flushed red, and panic flared. She tried to struggle, but his other hand held her wrist like iron. He spun her so she faced the carnage, an endless field of burning wreckage cutting across the black of space. Dozens of ruined ships drifted among the debris. Hundreds more were streaking away, engines flaring. It should have been nothing but the soundless, cold vacuum of space. Instead, Leon's voice slipped into her head like a demon whisper. "You want to protect the remaining scrolls, don't you? Then watch. See what you can protect." Carol hadn't even had time to react before two scarlet heat beams erupted from her. They shot past her, searing through the void and into the fleeing scroll ships. One by one, they detonated. Each white-hot explosion was the instant end of dozens of lives. No one survived the blazing light. The funeral pyre in space completed its terrible symmetry. Around them, the solar system itself seemed split, one half bathed in the sun's warmth, the other a storm of explosions, charred wreckage, and frozen bodies. They stood at its center, witnesses to a slaughter. "No, don't!" Carol's voice broke. She had tried to save them. She had wanted to protect them. To watch the lives she'd risked everything for snuffed out was a pain that tore through her. She gaped at Leon, rage and grief surging up, ready to name him the executioner. Leon only raised a hand. "Wait." He turned his attention to the 900-plus super scrolls gathered nearby. He spoke into their minds with the same cold calm. "You disgust me. Don't stay on Earth. Take the Power Stone and the Mind Stone into the universe and bring me Thanos' head, and find any scrolls still fleeing. Send them to join their kin. A race should be together." The scrolls received it and silently agreed. They seemed unoffended by his contempt. Photon energy flared around them, and they cut across the sky, 1,000 streaks of light like a meteor shower as they left the solar system. Carol watched them go, bewildered. She had assumed the super scrolls were being controlled. That was the only explanation for their indifference to their own kind's extinction. But now they were moving freely. Had they struck a deal with Superman? Were they traitors? Her head swam with suspicion and rage, but above all came a new, colder feeling: despair. Before she could sort out her thoughts, an overwhelming force slammed into her neck. The world blurred. In a heartbeat, Leon had dragged them both back to Earth and flung her to the ground. He strode toward her, his shadow long in the sun, and spoke with a voice like winter. "Carol," he said, "since 1989, when you gained your power from the Space Stone, you've been moving farther from your human roots. Many have thanked you across the universe. Earth has not. The war with the Skrulls is a race war," he continued. "Your repeated siding with them makes you a traitor." Carol's instinctive step back felt feeble. "What do you mean? What are you going to do?" "Very simple. I'm taking your power." Leon extended his palm, and the space stone's light surged from his inner world. Time had been different there. Although only a little over a month had passed outside since the fight with Dormammu, a century had unfolded within his inner realm. The Blood Sea clone had been there too, spending 100 years mastering the time and space stones. That long, relentless study had transformed those stones into laws in their hands. Leon's command of them had become absolute. For Carol, whose own power originated from the space stone, the consequences were immediate. To him, it was effortless to reach into her and unpick what made her extraordinary. "No, you can't. This is my power. You don't have the right," she shrieked, panic spiking. She threw every reserve of photon energy outward, trying to burn free, to fling herself off the planet if she had to. The space stone's light spread like liquid glass and trapped her instead. It seeped into her, prying at each cell, drilling into the source of her strength. "Why can't I do that?" Leon's voice was cold, almost conversational. "You've acted as a superhero across the cosmos, intervening, imposing your will on others without their consent. I do the same, and you call it tyranny. You think that's different?" He flexed his fingers, the gem's radiance threaded through her like filaments. "The only difference is power. Now that you are weaker than I am, I can do to you what you've tried to do to others." He drew the stone's pull tighter. Energy that had always answered to her will flowed away like water down a drain. With every second, she felt herself diminishing. Her photon blasts faltered, then stuttered, then died. The enhanced durability of her body drained out. Where once her flesh had withstood nuclear heat and cosmic force, now it trembled and went soft. It felt like a rocket suddenly losing thrust, no longer riding the heights, only falling back to ordinary gravity. "From now on, you will be ordinary," Leon said, as if pronouncing a sentence. "You will have time and night to repent for betraying Earth." He drew out the last vestiges of her origin and looked down at her. "If you refuse to atone as a superhuman, then drown in your ordinariness." His words smashed into her pride like thunder. Carol gathered herself, teeth bared, her lifelong refusal to bow roaring up inside her. She wanted to spit back, to tell him everything she had endured, every battle, every refusal to give up. But her strength betrayed her. The drain convulsed her body. She collapsed into Leon's shadow. Where her skin had been taut and unmarked, it slackened. Old scars and lines reemerged as if time was reasserting itself. Her ageless face, maintained by photon energy, was eroded. Age and injury crept back into her features. She went from towering to frail in seconds. "No, this can't be. My body. How can this be?" Her voice was a small thing now, thin as someone long confined to a bed. She stared at her hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Chapter 211. Final Imprisonment. Strength is a person's confidence. Life is, too. When a long life suddenly collapses back into the ordinary span of a human's 100 years, everything changes. Carol, already approaching 50, finally lost her last shred of defiance. "No, no, no, no," she screamed. There was no composure left in her, no stubbornness to pull herself up again after a blow. Her hands shook as she pawed at her face. How could her arms have withered like this? How could her cheeks be creased with such ugly lines? Her eyes, dulled by weakness, seemed to lose their color entirely. Carol felt as if she'd fallen down a dark shaft and the whole world was slipping away. Already starting to feel pain? Don't worry, humans are very adaptable. You'll get used to it. It'll hang over your head like a nightmare for the rest of your life. Leon's voice cut through the panic. At the sound, Carol's clouded eyes found him, and for a moment she sought a sliver of hope. "Don't do this, Superman, please. Don't do this. Give them back to me. Please, give them back. I can't lose them." Never had Carol been so filled with regret. She shouldn't have returned to Earth. She shouldn't have provoked Superman. And she shouldn't, out of nostalgia and pity, have pledged on behalf of humanity to grant the Skrull refuge. Too many should-haves had led to this. Perhaps the greatest mistake was overestimating herself against Superman when she was far too weak to resist. Carol crawled toward Leon on hands and knees, voice breaking, but her motions suddenly froze. Leon had stopped her with a mere thought, restraining her with telekinesis. Learning to cherish something only after you lose it is too late and meaningless. You should spend the rest of your shortened life learning what cherishing truly means. He made a portal and stepped through with her. He intended to hand Carol over to Tony to let the international tribunals judge this human traitor. Nick Fury, the undersea prison, the raft. Leon believed the best punishment for Carol's crimes was the rest of her abruptly shortened life, serving time in a dark cell. So the Skrull were wiped out just like that? Tony asked, incredulous. Didn't they use the internet? Didn't they know how strong you are? Who knows? Those green bastards are disgusting. They always want to invade other people's homes. No self-awareness at all, Leon said. He listened to Carol's muffled shouts as agents hauled her off outside, then turned back to Tony. Carol is in your hands now. She needs a just sentence. Don't worry. Tony poured Leon a glass of brandy. Either life imprisonment or execution. I can't think of a middling punishment I'd accept. He spun a finger in the air and grinned. Besides, the sudden appearance of hundreds of Skrull earlier and their attacks on civilians scared every government half to death. You stopped them, right? Everyone knows only you could stop hundreds of Skrull at once. Jarvis recorded everything, you wiping them out, and sent the footage to the Avengers. All I need to do is hand the footage to the Security Council. From now on, if you say one word, who on earth would dare dispute you? Hey, Tony said, why do I get the impression you're sliding into unjust Superman territory? You haven't even found your Louise yet. Don't go dark now. Tony jabbered on. Leon rolled his eyes. The wings on my back are practically tangled. Does that count as not having found Louise? Wait, so you're admitting you've gone dark? No wonder you've been wearing black. It's way too grim. Tony took a sip. Leon watched as the glass trembled in his friend's hand. The shaking was a telltale sign of anxiety. Is the power the Super Skrull displayed getting to you again? He asked. Tony covered his mouth with the glass and forced a smile. Me? Anxious? Never. I've never felt better. Really? Leon didn't buy it. Tony pushed back. Okay. I was a little worried when those flashy Skrull flew out of the solar system. Each of them was as strong as Captain Marvel, right? Even you only let them leave. He drained the rest of his brandy in one go. I was worried they'd come back. Leon snorted. Impossible. I've controlled them. Controlled? Right, I used something from the Starry Sky world, Leon briefly explained. An enslavement secret art. Enslavement secret art? There's a thing like that? Tony's eyes widened, then his sarcasm snapped back into place. Leon, you're getting less and less like a good man. At that, Tony brightened. The weight in his chest lifted, and he was back to needling his younger brother. I may not be a good man, but I did bring you a gift. Leon lifted his hand, and a brilliant white gold light bloomed in his palm. A faint halo of blue gem-like energy circled it. What is that? Your 50th birthday present. Oh, please. I'm not even 40 yet. You already gave me my present, that sky fortress. You haven't forgotten. My 2.5-hand birthday gift. Unforgettable, Tony joked. So what is it? Captain Marvel's powers. Super strength, super speed, accelerated healing, extended lifespan. Leon raised an eyebrow. How's that sound? Like a touch of godhood. One touch and you could have it all. Tony's expression went serious. He leaned in, studying the light. You stripped her of her abilities. Yes, it's the best punishment for her. Leon inclined his head. I'll merge them into your body now. No, wait. I won't be caught dead looking like a glowing little dress. Tony waved his hands. Are you serious? Godlike power is right there and you're worried about aesthetics? It would look cool, Leon said dryly. Tony paced a few steps, then stopped to think. Why not give it to your men in black? Their fighting style fits that power more. They don't need it. Once I break through another major realm, they can borrow my strength and extend their lives, maybe even become mini Supermen themselves. That's tempting. I'll borrow it when the time comes. Tony considered the gift a moment, then shook his head. This one? Forget it. Give it to someone else. Things from the outside are easy to lose, Leon said. I trust Jarvis and my suits more. Tony's eyes lit up. Pepper it is. You think giving her Captain Marvel's power is a good idea? Leon asked. She can protect herself at night. Tony chuckled, then sobered. No, seriously. I don't want to come back to Los Angeles one day and find our home reduced to rubble. Leon opened a portal with a faint smile. On the other side, Pepper, taking her afternoon tea and finally freed from the constant grind since Jarvis became an intelligent life form and took over most of Stark's managerial duties, leaned in curiously. Tony, Leon, what are you two up to? Pepper, Leon asked with a casual smile, the glow still pulsing in his palm. Would you like to be beautiful forever? To never age? Eternal youth? Are you kidding me, Leon? Pepper set her delicate teacup down and stared at them, half amused, half incredulous. Chapter 212. Weak, poor, and helpless. Tempted by the promise of eternal youth and beauty, Pepper had barely hesitated before accepting Leon's gift. Wrapped in golden energy, she spent most of the day soaring through the sky, exhilaration written across her face. She only returned to Los Angeles with Tony as dusk fell. Her adaptability was remarkable. Just as with Tony's serum enhancement the last time, it took Pepper only 2 nights to master the use of photon energy. The price, however, was visible. Tony looked like he'd been through a war, pale, eyes sunken. Another price was the cliffside mansion on the Los Angeles coast. In just 2 nights, the lavish house had been reduced to rubble. You can't imagine how crazy Pepper is right now, Tony complained to Leon over a holographic call on the 3rd morning. She insisted on flying the clouds with me, and she wouldn't even let me put on my armor. I think we made a miscalculation, Leon. Pepper, she... Hey! Stop! Leon is still here. Don't you dare. Oh, no. Leon's projection froze on the image of Tony being yanked out of frame by a glowing arm that shot into the shot, and the call cut off. In the Brooklyn apartment, Leon and Wanda exchanged looks. Wanda had come by to report on her progress with chaos magic. Tony's rant had ended abruptly, and both of them could picture, with an odd mix of sympathy and amusement, the painful joy Tony was probably enduring miles away. Well, Leon broke the quiet, they probably just went out to get some grapes. Grapes in Los Angeles have gotten pricey lately. Wanda stared at the blank projection, cheeks tinged pink. Yeah, I suppose so. She wasn't thinking about grapes. Leon could hear her heartbeat, faint at first, then quickening. A few seconds of silence hung between them. Leon watched Wanda's slightly stunned profile and decided to press. Wanda, don't you feel like the price of grapes in New York has gone up a little these last few days? The question was perfectly timed to her flustered state. She met Leon's gaze, and her quickened heartbeat sputtered into an erratic skip. What do you mean? She stammered, turning away like a startled rabbit. The more she tried to avoid him, the closer Leon moved. Her breathing accelerated. Her pulse pounded so loud in her ears that Leon, thanks to his enhanced hearing, heard it clearly. In that moment, his super hearing felt almost like mind reading. What I mean is, do you want to? Wait, sorry. Wanda cut him off abruptly, closing her eyes and waving her hands as if to banish the sound. The usually melancholy woman suddenly took on the panicked energy of a teenager caught unprepared. It was as if something buried deep inside her had been wrenched awake by the pounding in her chest. She scrambled to her feet, covering her ears, face flushed, and fled for the door, tripping over the sofa in her haste. She scrambled up, disheveled and stumbling, and ran out. I just remembered. It's my turn to cook today. I have to go. Her voice vanished down the hallway as the door slammed shut. Even using chaos magic to hurry herself away, her heartbeat didn't slow until she reached her own apartment. Leon could imagine her throwing herself onto her bed, curling up under the covers, and making odd noises as she tried to calm down. Then a surge of chaos magic slammed into him, cutting off his hearing as Wanda erected a mental barrier. She had noticed everything. This doesn't count as eavesdropping, does it? Leon muttered to himself, awkwardly suppressing his enhanced hearing. For the next 3 days, Tony was alternately pained and delighted. Pepper stayed blissful. Captain Marvel, by contrast, existed in a very different shape of pain. Carol had been handed over to the United Nations and tried publicly. International trials usually take months, sometimes years, but given the severity of her betrayal and the evidence Tony supplied, the court fast-tracked the case. It opened the very next day and was broadcast live. Under the gaze of the world, she was convicted of severely endangering human safety and sentenced to life imprisonment. That same day, she was transferred to the raft. From the moment she was paraded through public spaces, she was met with rage. Crowds glared at her with undisguised loathing. Adults, children, everyone. During the transfer, there were 2 assassination attempts. One of the escorting officers pulled a hidden gun, another lunged with a knife, Carol was gravely wounded and had to be rushed to a nearby hospital for emergency treatment before they could continue. But the physical injuries were only part of her suffering. The constant hostility, the feeling that the entire world had turned against her, shredded her nerves. By the time she finally arrived at the raft, she was barely clinging to life. Mentally, she felt on the edge of collapse. Inside the prison, she saw Fury, an old ally, confined behind a transparent partition. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope that at least one person would stand with her. Instead, Fury hurled himself against the glass, eyes bloodshot. "Carol, how could you let those super Skrulls get away? How could you do that?" he shouted, accusing. Carol tried to explain. "Nick, I just..." But Fury's rage cut through her. She had not expected even her old friend to turn on her. The betrayal of that moment pushed her over the edge. Her vision blurred, her lips trembled, and she fainted. When she came to, she was inside a transparent cell. Guards walked past with the same expression, hatred. The recruitment system for the raft had reportedly crashed under the flood of applications once her imprisonment was announced. Most of the new guards were people who had been harmed by the Skrulls or their relatives. They watched her like prey. Even without words, their eyes told her that every bit of pain they had suffered would be blamed on her. Carol curled into herself, shaking like a small animal, and for the first time in her life, she found herself quietly, desperately asking, what exactly had she done? Chapter 213, Steve's Concerns. The afternoon sun poured through the windows of Avengers Tower. Lion was leaning against Tony's desk, the glow of a projected screen reflected on his hand. Nick Fury submitted a request to leave prison an hour ago. To go into space, he wants to make one last contribution to Earth? Tony pinched the bridge of his nose. I can read the words, but put together they sound like a different language. Carol's been in jail less than 10 hours. Is Fury rushing to clear her name? Lion shut off the projection and looked at Tony, who looked worn out behind the desk. I thought they'd be kept together in the same cell. Tony rubbed his temples and shook his head. It's not about clearing her. He, like I used to, believes Carol's obstruction allowed those super Skrulls to escape the solar system. Tony's body healed quickly the way Tony's always had, but his spirit, today, was frayed. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. So Fury wants to get himself out there, make a stand for Earth. He thinks the Skrulls will regroup and come back. So he really is standing on the side of Earth's protection. Lion nodded. Has the UN signed off? No, he chose to take prison time. It's not easy to get out. Tony opened one eye. I heard he and Carol actually fought in prison, got so heated she fainted. Lion arched a brow. Close friends fighting? Fascinating. Guess I underestimated Fury. Dedicated, and a bit of a bastard, too. Enough about that. Tony looked at Lion. Do you know why I called you down here? Lion stuck a finger out. To check if you've been emotionally drained. You don't look great. Tony waved a hand weakly. Ha, I'm perfectly fine. I could take 100 Captain Americas right now. Don't be ridiculous. Oh yeah? Lion studied him. Physically, Tony was fine, but mentally hollow. Does Pepper know you're in such prime condition? Tony's eyes snapped open at the name, and he let out an embarrassed laugh. Of course she knows. Cough. Lion, I called you because I've got news from Wakanda. He tapped the desk, and the projections sprang to life again. Images of the Wakandan Royal Guard, Agent Hawkeye and Agent Coulson, and several crystalline containers of a metallic, liquid-looking substance. The Skrull invasion set off a crisis in Wakanda, Tony said. King T'Chaka agreed to sell us vibranium. The price is well below the black market rate. Hawkeye and Coulson came back with a shipment. Tony enlarged the image. If you want some, take it. We can set Men in Black up with Wakanda too. It looks like the king is finally thinking about ending isolation and engaging the world. Lion shrugged. What's odd is their insistence on keeping the old ways while trying to master cross-era tech with vibranium. It makes no sense. What's so strange? You invented half the stuff in your lab, and people still don't get why you don't use it to run a global tech empire instead of building suits. Tony picked up a pen and twirled it. You don't need vibranium, but if you're building new suits with it, you could also help Men in Black upgrade their gear and have them foot the bill. That's a big business. Tony flicked the pen. If they actually paid for it, Superhero company's cash flow wouldn't cover the upfront costs. You'll cover the shortfall, Lion smirked. Maybe, but Yelena went to get Captain America's authorization a few days ago. Tony's tone shifted. She decided to donate all merchandising revenue from the Captain America IP to set up a relief foundation. Lion blinked. She told you? No, the captain told me. Tony's face softened into something like a rueful smile. We argued. I punched him in the face. He said my younger brother knows how to reduce war, but I'm a weapons dealer. You two fought? Lion asked, more curious than worried. Can't say it didn't happen. Tony shrugged. I confessed about Bucky to him, lied and said I was the one behind it. Then we fought. Lion frowned. He had no idea whether Tony's lie had been to protect himself, his brother, or Steve. He was more intrigued than anything else. How did it end? Tony twirled the pen, then set it down. We made up. Eventually. Across town, in the Captain America Memorial Hall, Steve Rogers sat in the back row of the screening area, a small jade bottle cupped in his hands. Peggy Carter's interview played on the big screen. Her composure and bright accent were as striking as ever. Listening to her, Steve's mind wandered. 5 days earlier, all Skrulls on Earth had been cleared and the fleet had vanished from the solar system. Everyone had breathed easier, thinking the crisis was over. Steve had felt that relief too. He had been lying in bed then, sifting through memories. The jump from fighting Hydra under Schmidt one moment to fighting aliens the next had been jarring. The world moved faster than he did. He kept up the only way he knew how, by moving. When he learned he'd been asleep for nearly 70 years and that Peggy had aged into a different era, the shock hit him hard. Tony had forced the Skrull search mission on him, and that mission had helped, gave him something useful to do, a place on this new world's ship. So when the superhero company approached him, asking for Captain America branding rights and offering him half the profits, Steve refused. I don't need that money. Give it all to those in need. I get a salary from the Avengers. His refusal moved the company. They matched his half, and together they set up a war relief foundation. Later, Steve found out Superhero Company was part of Stark Enterprises. The founder was Lyon Stark, Tony's younger brother. Steve smiled at the thought. Howard's sons. Everyone had said they were like their father. They were generous, responsible in their own ways. That feeling stayed with him until Tony came back around, starting this whole conversation over again. Chapter 214. John confessed the truth. I'm sorry. I don't quite understand what you're saying, Stark. Bucky died 70 years ago. What do you mean you killed him? In a certain neighborhood in Brooklyn, in an underground gym with poor lighting and exposed brick, Tony found Captain America shirtless and working out. He had come to tell Steve about Bucky's death and why it had happened. Steve frowned, convinced Tony was joking. He knew something of the man in front of him, an officer, the son of an old friend, and someone who could be a little frivolous. He hadn't expected this. You think I'm joking? Tony shook his head. You probably should. Honestly, it sounds absurd. Dying and coming back, then being killed again. It sounds like a cruel prank, but I'm serious. Tony took a few steps, careful to avoid Steve's gaze. Bucky didn't die. Hydra froze him, kept him alive, and he lived until modern times. You know Hydra resurfaced in the Strategic Scientific Reserve, which became S-Shield, Steve said, and Bucky was one of them, Tony replied. Impossible. Bucky would never join Hydra, no matter what they did to him. Steve stared hard at Tony. He didn't join. He was brainwashed. Look at this. Tony tossed a thumb-sized projector phone to Steve. It was Stark Electronics' newest model, a small crystal device that threw a translucent screen into his palm. Files about the Winter Soldier and Hydra filled the light. Steve's face hardened as he scanned them. The files traced Bucky's path, found by a Hydra base, healed, modified, brainwashed, frozen, and then thawed when needed for assassination missions. Steve's finger moved over the screen until it stopped on a single line. December 26, 1991, killed Howard Stark and his wife. Adopted son Lyon Stark survived. A long breath left Steve. All of this is true. The truth doesn't lie. Tony stopped walking. He killed Howard. Steve was silent for a moment, then with quiet force, I'm very sorry, Tony. No need. He already paid the price. He died by my hand. Tony's gaze slid to the brick wall. Steve opened his mouth, then closed it. His thoughts were a jumble. Bucky hadn't died under an ice cliff. He'd been alive, taken by Hydra, used to commit murder, and then killed by Tony. The information hit him too fast. He hadn't even had time to feel the shock or the joy of Bucky's survival before the second death was placed on top of it. For Steve, it felt like a gutted fish suddenly flopping in hot oil, an instant of movement and then nothing. Beyond a brief shock and regret, he felt strangely numb. He had already mourned Bucky for decades. The man had lived in his memory as the Bucky of 70 years ago. Now, learning the complicated truth didn't change the long, quiet absence in him. He stood in silence until he finally sighed. Was he still under Hydra's control when you killed him? Did he have any last words? His voice was low. He was just like any other Hydra soldier at that point. Tony didn't answer directly. Steve lowered his eyes and nodded. I understand. You can go, Tony. Leave me alone for a while. Tony paused, then held up his hands. Nothing else? What else is there? Steve frowned. He was in no mood for anything. Anyone who found out their best friend from a lifetime ago had survived the war only to be used as a weapon and then killed by another friend's child would be upset. He might be tempted to blame Tony for killing an innocent man controlled by Hydra, but that was a fleeting emotional reaction, not the core of how he felt. Mostly he was bewildered by how rotten the world could be, and that such rotten things happened to him. Tony, however, had prepared for a far worse reception. Expecting to be punched or worse, he had defaulted to nervous chatter. Sorry, I thought you'd be crying. I figured you two old popsicles from that era would be too attached to part, and I... Wait, what did you just say? Steve's temper, already frayed, flared. Popsicle? He stepped toward Tony, eyes blazing. Show some respect for your father's friends, especially his dead friends, Mr. Stark. Tony's face twisted into a sneer. Little Stark, are you saying you're my uncle? He no longer tried to hide his resentment toward the man Howard had praised. How quaint. An old man frozen for half a century thinks he can still insist on seniority. He jabbed a finger into Steve's chest. Tell me something. Did my father even know you were his friend? A friend who slept for 70 years and didn't care about him after he woke up? Steve shot back. Tony laughed, derisive. If you're trying to provoke me with words, congratulations, Stark. You succeeded. And if you keep poking me like that, we'll be discussing this another way. Oh, really? Tony mocked his tone, then spread his hands. All right, if you want to fight, let's get on with it. Steve clenched his jaw. Fine, you asked for it. He struck hard and precise, a punch to Tony's chin, another to his abdomen that doubled him over. Steve loomed over him. You're nowhere near as good as your younger brother. The company he founded is using all my IP income to help war refugees, while you're nothing but an arms merchant. Steve's view of Tony came mostly from the news and scattered reports. The country's biggest arms dealer 6 months ago, Playboy, Iron Man, who supposedly changed. Tony's ties to weapons made him an easy target of Steve's prejudice. Steve turned and left after speaking. He picked up his coat and his shield from the floor, then paused on the threshold. Tony, standing with his back turned, called out with a grin that managed to be both insolent and amused. Before you point that full backside at me, shouldn't we finish what we started? Steve straightened, shot Tony a look, and dropped his coat again. He began to roll up his sleeves. In his current condition, Tony was no fragile civilian. He was built like someone who could probably shrug off a 7.62mm round. Letting Steve land the first blow had been a pretext. Respect for the old soldier now, the right to lay into him later. You want to fight? Steve said. Fine. I hope your armor is as tough as your mouth. Tony laughed. What armor? This is the armor I'm wearing, he said, flexing his wrists. He stood in a white shirt, gray trousers, and crocodile shoes, looking less like a billionaire than like a fired-up boxing commentator pacing to the ring. Steve frowned. Without an armored suit, Tony was, to Steve's eyes, just another man. 10 such men would be easy. He shook his head, about to walk away, when Tony closed the distance with the quick, shuffling footwork of Sanda. I'll knock you out with the same hook, Tony warned. Steve dismissed him. Without armor, you're just someone who knows a few moves. He never finished. 2 meters, 1 step, and Tony's hook came out as fast as lightning. The wind screamed and was swallowed by an even sharper sonic crack. Steve's instincts flared, and he raised his shield. Tony's fist slammed into the upper rim. Clang! The dull metallic impact echoed in the empty room. The force threw Steve backward. He slammed into the wall and slid down to the floor. His defense had been rushed and compromised. If not for the shield, vibranium eating most of the kinetic energy, the blow would have cracked the wall. Steve scrambled up, incredulous. "You weren't wearing armor." Tony grinned. "Captain America's not the only one who got enhanced by the serum." Now that he had the upper hand, Tony was elated. "Even without armor, I'm still a superhero." He couldn't help rubbing it in. "It's not too late to surrender, Captain." Steve's face went serious. He lifted his shield. "I can do this with you all day." Tony's smile turned into a fierce, boyish grin. He charged. The two met in the middle, fist against shield, and the room filled with the rhythm of blows, metallic impacts, dull thuds, the staccato music of two fighters pushing each other. Every time Tony swung, Steve's combat intuition had him raising the shield. The vibranium at the center soaked up much of the punch, and Steve only ever took a step back, looking for an opening to counter. Tony's reflexes were faster, though. He could block and riposte in the same breath. They traded momentum. Steve threw his shield after a feint, letting it ricochet off walls to force Tony to dodge. Tony seized the shield and headbutted Steve until the world tilted. They matched each other blow for blow until the light outside faded and night draped itself over the room. Eventually, both men lay on the floor, breathing hard. Steve's face was a map of bruises, split skin, and a swelling cheek. Tony's hair was dust gray from the debris. Neither moved. Both were spent. Tony had held himself back. He used near full power in his punches because Steve could block them with the shield, but he kept his speed deliberately in check. If he'd been faster and actually landed a lethal hit, Captain America would have died there and then, and Tony would have woken up to the world calling him a murderer. He imagined Leon giving a thumbs up and congratulating him for finishing the job. The thought made Tony's grin sour for a moment. Still, the truth was undeniable. Steve looked worse for wear. Tony couldn't help a small, private laugh when he saw the broken soldier beside him. Phew, he was the first to push himself up. He brushed dust off his clothes, kicked a pile of crumbled bricks clear, and fished his suit jacket out from beneath the rubble. He pulled from an inner pocket a small jade bottle and a folded piece of paper and set them both on the floor in front of Steve. "You still owe Carter a dance," Tony said, watching Steve with an odd, soft expression. "Go find her. Make up for it." He placed the folded instructions beside the bottle. "The most important thing for a superhero is to keep his word. She's been waiting for you a long time. Start over." Steve lifted his bloodshot eyes and stared at the items, incredulous. He sat there for a long moment, the fight's adrenaline draining away, until at last he reached for the jade bottle. Tony lingered at the doorway as the late sun spilled orange across his profile. "By the way," he called, "welcome back, Captain. I'll bet $10 you'll fall in love with this crazy world all over again." Then he left. In the dim room, Steve uncorked the bottle with trembling hands. The instructions told him what he needed to know. He drank. Within moments, the cuts, the swelling, the bruises seamed and smoothed as if swept away. He stared at the jade glass, struck by the fact that Tony, an enemy, a rival, had given him something so precious. For the first time in a long time, Steve felt the old certainty wobble. Tony Stark's barbed edges hid a warmth he had not expected. After that, time folded back to the present. Steve watched the old videotape of Peggy Carter's interviews in the Memorial Hall on a loop. The reel clicked and spun like a metronome, marking time that hadn't stopped for him. He kept watching until the light outside fell toward dusk. Clutching the jade bottle, he finally made his choice. He left the memorial and headed to the sanatorium. The place wore its history on its walls. White paint sun-yellowed, vines crawling upward, a row of incandescent bulbs blinking in the corridor before nightfall. The nurse gave him a room number. Steve pushed the door open. Dusk flooded the small space in a wash of orange, the curtains drawn back, and the window open to a gentle breeze. Sunset slanted across the opposite wall, and branches outside sent dark, swaying shadows over the single bed. By the window sat a white-haired woman with her back to him. For a moment, Steve simply watched. The woman was smaller, more fragile than his memory, a face retooled by time, but still the same. He felt his chest tighten with words he couldn't find. After a long hesitation, he let the one he could stand say itself. Peggy? The old woman turned, a beat of confusion and then recognition passing over her face. Steve, she whispered, surprise and something like joy in her voice. Her saying his name steadied him. He stepped forward and let himself look at the woman the years had made into an elder, but whose eyes were still the eyes he knew. I'm sorry, he said slowly. I missed our appointment. Steve froze at Peggy's surprised expression, and the memory of their last kiss on the snowy ridge of the Alps came flooding back. Hydra's transport plane, loaded with gas canisters, was roaring down the runway. He had been about to hitch himself to its landing gear and ride it into whatever return there might be. From the back of the Jeep, Peggy had stood on tiptoe, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him like she was giving him every scrap of luck and courage in the world. In that moment, he had no doubt he could save the world. He did. He stopped Schmidt, crashed the plane into the ice cap, and truly saved everyone. He had been worthy. Except that the dance they'd promised after the war had been postponed for half a century. The girl who had once stood on tiptoe in the Jeep now had silver in her hair. Steve had simply woken up in another time, like a man who had slept through an era. That dance looked destined never to happen, unless his right hand was in his trouser pocket, thumb pressed against a small jade bottle through the fabric. He was impulsive and hesitant at once. Peggy, a relic of his past, had lived a full life. Family photos crowded the bedside cabinet. No adult male appeared in them, but there were two children, a boy and a girl, smiling in the way of families who had made peace with life. Steve looked around the room, taking it all in as Peggy talked about the years he had missed. At last he unclenched his hand in his pocket and let the bottle settle. He smiled faintly, sat down, and stayed at her bedside, watching the world outside the window being turned to gold by the setting sun. This world is still beautiful, he said, even if there's a lot I don't understand anymore. Aliens, for one. Peggy took his hand and squeezed. It's beautiful because you saved it, Steve. We just made a mess of it again, she said, apologetic. No, you didn't, he replied, holding her aged fingers. What you built with S.H.I.E.L.D. is something to be proud of. No one wanted Hydra to happen. He smiled with affection. One of the reasons I joined the current Avengers is because part of their origin story traces back to you. Avengers. Peggy's expression shifted. No one can tell what the future will bring, Steve. The world has changed so much. Be careful. I will, he told her. His eyes were full of warmth and an ache he could not hide. They talked for a long time. He poured out the confusion and longing of a century, the hollow that remained where a life had been lived without him. Peggy listened and occasionally squeezed his hand like a command given and kept. The sun's almost down. Maybe I should come by again next week. He was about to say goodbye when his gaze fell on the photograph again, and he smiled, a small, private relief knotting his chest. He rose to leave. Then Peggy began to cough, a hard, rattling cough that bent her old body over. She clutched at his shoulder, eyes squeezed shut, pain crinkling her face. Peggy, Steve helped her lie back against the pillows. I'll go call the nurse. He turned for the door, but the coughing subsided into a single incredulous gasp. Steve? He stopped in the doorway and turned back. I'll be right back, Peggy? Peggy leaned against the pillow and fixed him with a look as though she were seeing him for the first time in decades. Surprise hardened into scrutiny, then dissolved into disbelief, and finally into a joy that left her voice cracking. You're alive, Steve. You're alive. Tears spilled down her cheeks, genuine and immediate. Her breathing quickened. She sounded both ecstatic and as if she could laugh and cry at once. You're back. You're back. Steve stood, stunned at the doorway, and then he understood. Her face had shifted from the composed woman he'd met an hour before, the woman who'd seemed to have moved on, who'd found her own life, into someone flooded with young longing and a love that time had only buried, never erased. The surprise in her eyes now felt like the truest thing in the room. If she still lit up at his presence, even with her memory fractured, then the old promise between them had never really died. He walked slowly to the bed, knelt, and let her take his hand. I knew you wouldn't die, Steve. You still owe me a dance, Peggy whispered, her skin loose with age, but her voice alight with the old determination. "I'm here," he said softly, squeezing her fingers. "Of course I came back. There's a partner waiting for that dance." He tucked a white strand of hair behind her ear. Even now, after all these years, she was stubborn and headstrong in the ways he loved. He found himself making a decision with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. Peggy had given herself to the world and to her family. She had every right to the life she'd built. He would not force the old life on her. From his pocket, he drew the jade bottle Tony had given him. He twisted off the stopper, and a sweet, vivid scent bloomed into the room. The air seemed to brighten. Even the wilted vine on the windowsill looked momentarily greener. Peggy stared at the small green glass as if it held the sun. Her eyes, clouded with age, cleared and widened. "What is this?" she asked, voice small. Her whole body seemed to answer her question with a single hunger, an urge to take what was inside the bottle and drink. Chapter 217, The Promised Dance. "It can make you young again," Steve said softly. "It can let us do more things together. Peggy, will you finish our promised dance with me?" Peggy Carter looked like a child who had just been given back a treasure. Nothing in the world seemed more precious than Steve standing in front of her. She nodded, almost bouncing with the motion. "I will, Steve. Of course I will." "Come, Peggy." He gently helped her up, pressed the palm-sized jade bottle to her lips, and tipped it so she could drink slowly, making sure every drop took effect. Peggy never took her eyes off him, watching his careful movements. One of them was old and frail, the other young and strong, yet the sight was perfectly balanced, like a couple deeply in love. "How do you feel?" Steve asked, his face lined with concern. Peggy thought for a moment. "It feels like nothing, like drinking a cup of hot water, if warm from my throat and spreading through my body." Steve's brow creased at the supposed lack of sensation, but then the warmth she described intensified. It wasn't merely heat, but a concentrated life force that spread through her veins, permeating every cell. Her blood quickened, her skin flushed with health, and the bones in her body seemed to polish themselves, smoothing and strengthening. "What's happening to me?" Under that surge, Peggy's neurons recovered rapidly. Memories and muscle memory snapped back into place. The warm sensation was like soaking in a spring. She brushed her arm and flakes of dead skin fell away to reveal soft new skin beneath. In a breath, the white in her hair shed and thick, sensuous, curly brown hair sprang back. Loose skin tightened, wrinkles vanished. In the space of a minute, she had the face and body of a woman in her 20s, perhaps even more youthful than before. Steve stared, half dazed. "That bastard Tony. I love him for this," he muttered. "Tony?" Peggy blinked, startled awake by the name. "Steve, did you get this from Tony? Something that can restore youth?" Steve, half kneeling by her bed, placed the jade bottle in her palm. "Tony gave me this. He said it's a spring they found, scroll water from the highest peak in the universe. Tony said it can reverse aging." He believed every word. "He told me you waited for me for decades. He said you shouldn't leave with regrets, so I came back for you, Peggy." Peggy's face shifted to a more complicated expression. "It's probably more than just youth restoring," she said slowly. "Tony thought of everything." She was partly happy and partly reserved. Steve felt a pang of guilt. "I misjudged Tony at first. That was my fault." "But what we should be doing now," Steve said, standing and straightening his back, offering his right hand with a gentleman's ease, "is keeping a promise. I've kept you waiting a long time, a promise 70 years overdue." "Promise?" Peggy stared at him. Logic said she should be ecstatic. Youth returned. The man she loved returned. Both things should have made her the happiest woman alive. Instead, an odd, fragile smile tugged at her lips, and she felt a sudden urge to flee. Should we dance now?" she asked, the smile wavering. Then she backtracked in a burst of nervousness. "I mean, maybe we should find a day, a jazz bar, wear formal clothes and proper makeup." Her voice trailed off at the puzzled look on Steve's face. "No need for all that," she hurried to amend, taking his outstretched arm. She pushed herself up with more force than she intended, and unprepared for how strong she had become, fell into him. The momentum sent him to the floor with a surprised grunt. Dead skin rustled as it fell away. "Steve, are you all right?" Peggy scrambled to help him, panic in her voice. He barely noticed the pain in his ribs as he sat up, rubbing his chest and holding her hand. You look a little too young now. Peggy laughed, breathless. Just a little younger than you. They stood facing each other, then, as if by long habit, began to move. They fell into the steps instinctively, circling the small room in a slow, intimate dance. The room was silent, save for the rhythm of their feet. Their steps matched so perfectly, they left only two neat, overlapping trails on the tile. Outside, the sun had slipped below the horizon, and the last of the light softened and waned in the room. Peggy's striped hospital gown spun like a dress. She held her chin up and moved with the confidence of a trained dancer. Steve, in a simple t-shirt, supported her at the waist. Near the end, Peggy used Steve's arm as a pivot and spun, barefoot tapping the tiles. Even in a hospital gown, she looked like a swan in flight for a moment. They finished in a leaning embrace, eyes bright and fixed on one another, and for a beat, the world outside the doorway did not exist. At that moment, the door of the adjoining room opened quietly. An old man with a head of white hair and hollowed eyes stepped into the corridor. He paused when he saw them, and the shock gave way to a soft, relieved breath. Then, watching Peggy move, light, precise, almost impossibly agile, his relief turned to fresh astonishment. Chapter 218. He is also called Steve. The old man stood dazed in the doorway, watching everything unfold. He watched Peggy spin in the young man's arms. He watched them hold each other after the dance, eyes bright in the dim room. He watched them draw close, then burn for one another. He recognized the young man. He recognized the young Peggy Carter, too. But this wasn't right. Shouldn't Peggy be the old woman by the bed, recounting her past with a trembling voice while Steve sat and listened? Where was his elderly Peggy? Had this young man somehow made her young again? Outside, the streetlights flicked on. A dull yellow light filtered through the gap in their embrace and fell across the old man's face. He had Steve's eyes and the same features, only softened by loose skin, a bent back, and the thinness age brought. He looked almost like another Steve Rogers. His heart stirred. Without thinking, he stepped forward, and the soft sound of his shoes on linoleum echoed in the quiet room. The breathy silence, broken only by the hum of machines and their own breathing, made that tiny noise conspicuously loud. The couple in the doorway finally noticed him. They turned instinctively and saw an old man standing there, dazed and hesitant, as if about to speak but unsure how to begin. "Who are you?" the young Steve asked, puzzled. The old man's face was achingly familiar. "Steve!" Peggy cried, covering her mouth. She let go of the younger Steve as if on reflex, took a step back, and fumbled with the hem of her hospital gown. "What's wrong, Peggy?" the young Steve asked, alarmed at the note of panic in her voice. He followed her glance and saw Peggy looking at the old man in the doorway with a strange, startled expression. Steve stared at the visitor. It took him a moment to register what he was looking at, another man who looked almost exactly like him and who apparently shared his name. He instinctively moved a fraction away from Peggy, embarrassed and confused. "Are you Peggy's husband?" he asked softly. Shame and an odd surge of protectiveness rose in him. If this man was a substitute, someone who had lived in Steve's place, that would be unfair. And now he had intruded on Peggy and the life she'd built. He hadn't meant to rush in, to forget everything when he saw her. He could imagine abandoning everything for Peggy. What he couldn't imagine was upending someone else's family. Before he could broil in the thought, the old man, his face carved by years of weather, shook his head slowly and spoke with a weary sigh. "Let's find somewhere to talk, Peggy and Steve." In a high-end Brooklyn apartment, Leon poured himself a glass of cola and tried to keep a smile from spreading across his face. Jarvis had just finished composing a Chinese rendition of Unreachable Love, and the living room sounded with a plaintive, lilting melody that seemed to tell a story of unreturned affection. "Oh, did you see the way Steve looked just now? Like his heart was breaking," Leon murmured, pleased. "Tonight's love story belongs to Captain America." Across from him, Shirley was puzzling through a learning task Natasha had assigned. She scratched her head, not following her brother's tone of gloating. Half an hour later, in a retro coffee shop on the other side of Brooklyn, 3 people sat at a round table in the back corner, 2 men and a woman, one old and 2 young. Steve sat opposite the old man. Peggy occupied the chair between them. "You say you're from the future. Another me?" Steve asked. trying to keep his voice level as he grappled with the explanation he'd just been given. If the old man hadn't been so serious, and Peggy hadn't listened with that resigned expression, Steve would have called it a joke. So you came back to fix regrets, to keep your promise to Peggy and spend the rest of your life with her, Steve said more to himself than to anyone else, letting the scenario sink in. He felt a mixture of awe and relief. It explained why Peggy had been so calm when they reunited, why her Alzheimer's had flared with an unexpected rush of feeling when she saw him. There had been another Steve from the future, someone who had lived the decades Steve imagined for himself. It made sense, and it kept Peggy's family intact. It still bothered him. He'd been ready to rip everything up at the sight of her. But knowing someone had already taken that place eased some of the sting. So in the future, I can come back too, right? How did you do it? He blurted. The older man's expression didn't change. It might not be as simple as that, he said. I may not be your future self. I might be you from another universe. Steve blinked. What? Peggy, the old man glanced at her, then continued. There are things the Avengers need to know. The dangers you face could be far different from what I experienced. Peggy's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. You told me this? Yes, the older man said, and I think it's time your team heard it too. Steve felt like he was at the edge of a conversation that wasn't meant for him alone. Call Tony, he said before he could stop himself. I want to hear everything, and he should too. The old man nodded. 10 minutes later, a flash of red and gold landed gracefully outside the coffee shop. Tony's newest suit folded itself into a gleaming silhouette that knelt on one knee, then, after a short flourish of signatures and selfies for onlookers, shrunk back around his frame. He strode in, the armor receding like water, until all that was left was Tony's familiar swagger. Carter? Steve, he announced, not even across the room yet. Nice of you to use that spring water. Let me guess, you're about to rehearse that dance you promised and you want me to play witness? He sat between the two Steves, grinning. Agent Carter, you're looking very fetching. But hey, don't forget who made it possible. Then he turned to the older man with a mocking, knowing smile. And you, are you supposed to be the ex-husband? Look, I get it. Feelings are irrational. He clapped the older man lightly on the shoulder. The old man's eyes, sunken around the edges, held a faraway, almost nostalgic warmth. You haven't changed, Tony, he said. Only more flippant than before the war. Tony's grin faltered into a frown. That war, hang on. Do we know each other? Were you there? The old man's voice was steady. In my world, we fought side by side. There are threats coming that may not resemble the ones you've faced. That's why you need to hear everything. If you have questions, then be quiet and listen, little Tony, Peggy cut in. And call me Aunt Carter, she added. Tony's playful grin vanished and he straightened. He still treated Peggy Carter with respect. Of course, I'll be very quiet. He paused, scrutinizing her with mock severity. Although, you look younger than me now, so aunt feels weird. Flattery made Peggy smile. No woman dislikes hearing she looks young, especially one who'd just come back from an old age when she'd nearly lost all her teeth. Just call me Carter, like your father, she said lightly. Phew, thanks for understanding, Tony exaggeratedly sighed. I almost thought I'd have to call a beautiful woman in her 20s aunt. That would have been difficult. His theatrics made Peggy laugh out loud. The older Steve watched them both and smiled. Tony's easy banter felt like a piece of the past restored. After the Chitauri attack, Tony's flippant, laid-back manner had been replaced by something steadier and more urgent. Seeing him like this tugged at Steve. Steve finally spoke. Now that Tony's here, can you explain about another universe, about parallel worlds? Tony's face tightened. He'd never heard the phrase another universe used outside of Leon and the Sorcerers. Old Captain America nodded and began, slow and deliberate. I'll start from the beginning. I am Steve Rogers. In World War II, then in 2011, S.H. Yield found me at the North Pole. In 2012, the Chitauri invaded. He told them everything. His life, the crises that would befall this Earth, the Chitauri invasion, Ultron, the blip, unflinchingly recounting the dangers that lay ahead. Each event weighed on Tony and Steve. After the blip ended, he finished, I stayed behind to return the stones, and then I built a life with Peggy. We had a family, and I lived to an old age. According to Tony, another Tony, I traveled from one timeline into another. These two timelines are different, but similar. Parallel worlds, old Steve added, eyes flicking like a general remembering campaigns. Tony frowned. If I'm not misunderstanding, you came from a world where things happened in the 70s or earlier? You knew Hydra still existed, that Bucky was brainwashed, that he would kill my father, Howard, and you did nothing. Steve, young Steve, had been staring at old Steve and Peggy's joined hands. Now he snapped alert, looking at the older man. Old Steve gave a rueful smile. I'm sorry. I lived quietly. I couldn't make changes. Why not? Tony's voice was full of held-back anger. To avoid interfering with the course of that world, old Steve said, lowering his lids. In that final battle, Sorcerer Supreme Strange told us that of millions of possible futures, we only won once. I couldn't be sure anything I did wouldn't affect that outcome. Tony was silent a moment, then leaned back in his chair. Was Thanos really that unbeatable? At that time, no one could beat him, old Steve said. Tony twisted his collar and stood. Your information's important. Thank you, but your involvement in this universe isn't necessary. He started toward the door. The changes you mention already started once you reappeared in Carter's life. Beyond that, it's a choice, whether you want to change things or not. His armor enveloped him, and he shot out of the cafe into the sky. The three remaining watched him go. Steve pulled his gaze away. He's right. This world has Superman and the Skrulls, completely different from what you described. Whether to change things or not is a choice. He looked at Peggy. And that's Bucky, and that's Howard. He stopped, unable to finish. Steve rubbed his temple and rose. Sorry, my head's muddled. I need to clear it. We'll talk later. What angered Steve wasn't only that old Steve hadn't tried to stop Bucky or save Howard. It was that this man, another Steve from a parallel world, had come here and taken Peggy. Peggy had been his companion through all that life, his reason and solace. He'd been the one to kiss her goodbye in the Alps. Why could someone from a different world cross over and take his place so casually? Steve? Peggy wanted to call after him, but she hesitated and turned to old Steve. Right now, he needed comfort more than lectures. She understood the choice he'd faced, personal happiness with Peggy versus the safety of a world. He'd chosen pain, but he'd chosen carefully. Steve, the changes with Superman and the Skrull only started this year. I understand that the choices you made before were necessary. Peggy squeezed his hand. Old Steve shook his head. They're right. It came down to desire, whether I wanted to interfere or not. If I'd really meant not to interfere, I should never have stayed. Sigh. He put a hand on Peggy's shoulder. Peggy, you don't have to be here with an old man like me. I'm used to being alone. I survived so much. Loneliness is what I do best. Having you by my side for decades was enough for me, she said. But he lived through everything with you. He holds the promises you made. Go back to him, Peggy. Don't leave him. And don't leave yourself with regrets. Peggy opened her mouth, prepared to argue that they were both Steve, both her heroes. In the end, she swallowed the words, looked at old Steve one last time, and hurried after the other Steve. Across the room, Leon watched with a satisfied expression. He expected the rest. Peggy would catch up with Steve, they'd argue, reconcile, and go home. He didn't need to watch any longer. I didn't expect it to unfold exactly like this, he murmured. Old Captain America probably settled his regrets and is ready to return to his original world, he added. That's why he accepted things so calmly, preparing to hand Peggy back to Steve. Leon hadn't planned much. He'd only dropped a bottle of Zeus spring water into the flow and let events play out. Most of what followed had been the choices of Steve and Peggy themselves. He couldn't rule out other multiversal observers, nudging things from the sidelines, but this time his guess was confirmed. Old Captain America came from a parallel world, not the future of this universe. Leon thought of interviews from his previous life. The Russos saying that Captain America spent his life with Peggy in a parallel world and returned to the main universe as an old man. A script editor's idea that Steve had gone back in time in his own timeline and lived in obscurity until the blip without changing anything didn't hold up. Peggy had 2 children with him. That alone would create impacts. In some universes, changing the past alters the future directly. In this universe, changing the past simply branches off a new timeline. It doesn't overwrite reality here. If people could reverse time to resurrect the dead, the risk would be catastrophic. Attempts like Dark Strange's to undo time for Christine would tear at the fabric of the universe itself. Satisfied, Leon leaned back and let the story continue to unfold on its own. Chapter 220, Love Story, to be continued. Leon had expected the story to end with Steve reclaiming Peggy and the older Captain America making a quiet exit. What came next nearly made him lose his balance. After a night of passion that had been 70 years overdue, Steve found himself conflicted again about Peggy's family. He woke from his blissful dream, struggled with his decision countless times, and finally decided to let go. Peggy, however, disagreed. She felt she needed to make up for the debt and harm she had caused Steve. Besides, her 2 children with the older captain were now over 30, married and settled, hardly connected to her as a mother. She could start fresh. With that back and forth, Steve couldn't bring himself to leave. And the older captain felt the same. He should have returned to his own timeline the night the truth came out, but decades of love are not easily shrugged off. He quietly stayed, thinking that even a few more glimpses of Peggy would be worth it. Where the tangled web of love and resentment among the 3 would end, no one could say. Tony, on the other hand, was delighted. The Avengers had suddenly gained 3 super soldier agents, and they were being treated to a real-time soap opera, practical and entertaining. Weeks later, when Leon heard about the situation, he paused for a moment and then sighed. Burning winter really does pop up everywhere. He wasn't surprised. Peggy Carter and Steve Rogers were, in a way, like an original charging plug and a data cable. When both were present, they naturally connected. When one was absent, other pairings could form. In the multiverse, every Steve Captain Carter variant made her heart flutter and tempted her to stay. For Peggy, sometimes it was enough that the other person was simply Steve. Whether he was her one true Steve mattered less. Steve felt similarly. He had deep feelings for Peggy, but she wasn't the only person he could love. In the original timeline, Captain America even developed a fledgling relationship with Peggy's niece Sharon after Peggy's funeral. Both of them were forward-looking in matters of the heart. It was, in the end, Captain America's private business, and Leon had no right to judge. He did, however, have Yelena quietly film everything. If ever there was a chance, with everyone's consent, to make Captain America Burning Winter, people would pay to see the melodrama around that righteous face. Still, the Peggy-Steve saga was only a brief interlude in everyday life. Early the next morning, after Leon dropped Shirley off at school, he and Tony went back to Kamar Taj. Tony wanted to check on Thanos. Leon was there to help Wong and Mordo with their plans for a magic academy and a Fantastic Beasts sanctuary. Evening had already fallen over Kamar Taj. Passing sorcerers bowed to Leon as he walked across the training ground toward the library with Tony. "Are you sure Thanos isn't a problem? Really just a piece of cake like you said?" Tony asked again. "Absolutely." Leon smirked. "By the way, how many times have you asked since we walked in?" "Tony, Thanos is about Carol-level strength. Even Pepper could beat him up right now," Tony said confidently. "Of course she couldn't. If things go south, you can always hide behind Pepper," Leon shot back. "No way. Look at this armor. Mark 11, nano armor. It can synthesize vibranium laser cannons anytime. It could shatter a small asteroid." Tony patted his chest, showing off. "Pepper can't even match the speed of my suit." Leon raised an eyebrow. "Pepper must be humoring you. How fast do you think your suit goes? Mach 300? Mach 400? Tony's smug grin faltered. "It can reach about Mach 27. 27? Leon blinked as if he hadn't heard such a low number in a long time. He clapped Tony on the shoulder. "Honestly, slow is kind of cute, Tony." Tony, face darkening, retorted, "It's experimental nanotech. It'll get faster." Also, in old Captain America's timeline, even Carol couldn't beat Thanos. "Why would Pepper?" Leon added. "Because their Thanos had the Infinity Stones. Ours doesn't." Leon opened his palm and 2 Infinity Stones, green and blue, floated above it. "I've got 2. It makes it harder for him to win. I've already sent the Super Skrull squad to look for the remaining stones and deal with Thanos," Tony said. He raised an eyebrow. "Those green-skinned guys are going to handle Thanos? For some reason, I suddenly find them kind of cute." "Oh, as cute as your slow little armor?" Leon teased. "Shut up. One day it'll be faster than you." They laughed all the way to the library. Wong and Mordo were waiting inside, and Banner had brought his girlfriend, Betty. With permission from the two senior sorcerers, Banner had actually brought Betty to help with the fantastic beasts. The archaeozoologists were clearly smitten. Betty, a biologist, had been so fascinated by the beasts that she quit her professorship at Culver University and joined Kamartaj. The two of them had gone from a scientist couple to a magic couple, far happier than Strange and his partner. Sorcerer Supreme, the customary salute passed between them. Wong and Banner immediately rushed to Leon. "Leon, you're finally here. Spatial fluctuations in my suitcase have been getting worse," Banner fretted. "Don't panic." Leon took the suitcase and examined it. "The undetectable extension charm is fading. That's normal. Its expansion effect isn't permanent. You should be able to repair it." 2 weeks earlier, when the scroll problem was still being sorted, Banner had mentioned this. He rubbed his hands. "My extension charm isn't as refined as Mr. Newt's. I can't maintain such a large space. I've been moving them quickly to other places. When I create the small world, we'll keep them there," Leon said. "Keep them in the small world? Can't you just reinforce the extension charm in the suitcase?" Wong demanded, looking genuinely distraught. He sounded as if his private hoard had been raided. "How did you know? It was stolen." Wong lamented, full of grief and indignation. "All the precious metals in my money box under the bed, gone, stolen by Banner's Niffler." "A Niffler?" Leon glanced at Banner, who gave an awkward, sheepish grin. "After the space in the box started acting up, I was worried it would hurt the beasts when it contracted, so I left the box open to let them out, and the Niffler, it just couldn't resist." Banner's cheeks flushed. "They're very active animals.